in your bag of supplies, you had a large Ziploc bag with a sign inside that said Pincushion, key fob, and drawstring bag. So this basically had 3 different projects in it. You do have one project that says drawstring bag, so that's all together. So you can go ahead and put that one aside. There is actually a pattern piece that goes with that that was in your pattern envelope. Sorry about that. And you also have a key fob pattern that we'll be doing pretty soon. Okay, so you won't need that right away. You don't need this little, it's like a little fuzzy thing. It's a thin piece of batting is what that's called. Okay, you also have a baggie of it's like a key fob hardware, and then there's buttons. You will need a button for the pincushion, and then you've got just a lot of different fabrics. Okay, now these fabrics, they vary from person to person. Not everybody got exactly all the same fabrics, but these fabrics will be used for your key fob as well as your pincushion. Okay, so if you like one of these particular ones for your key fob, then you might want to go ahead and pull that out. You'll also be choosing your fabric for your pincushion from the selection, whatever you got. Okay, so your pincushion is going to, you're going to have a pincushion pattern that looks like this. It was found in the big envelope in your supply bag. So you're going to be needing this. You are also going to be needing your bag of stuffing, okay, towards the end. So what you're going to do first is go ahead and cut your pattern pieces apart. Decide what fabrics you want to use for your pincushion. You can use just 2 different fabrics. You can use 8 different fabrics, okay, because you'll need 8 squares for the whole pincushion. Okay, so here's what I mean. These were made by students probably 3 or 4 years ago. Some people just use 2 fabrics, do like a little checkerboard pattern, and just the opposite on the other side. Okay, same thing with this one. Okay, so this is what your pincushion is going to end up looking like. It should be the bigger version. This particular person chose to use 8 different fabrics altogether. Okay, and 4 different fabrics here it looks like. Okay. Okay, so that's what you can choose to do. 2 fabrics, 8 different fabrics. This person did 4 different fabrics. So it's really up to you how you want to make this. Okay, but the key is it's gonna be made from squares. If you really want it to be all the same color, you still have to cut out the squares. All right, so you want to double up your fabric. I'm going to do 2 colors on my pincushion here for my example. I went ahead and just cut out all 4 of the pattern pieces. This fabric's a little bit thicker than what you have. You might be able to cut out 4 squares at a time. This fabric I'm choosing to cut 2. So I've got this fabric doubled over, pin my pieces down. Okay, so I'll get 4 from here and 4 from here for a total of 8. So you need 8 squares. So I'm going to cut these out, and then when we come back we'll be ready to pin. Okay, so I have all 8 of my fabrics cut out. I have 4 of my solids, I have 4 of my prints, so now I'm going to arrange these how I want them to be organized on each side. So basically you're pinning together 2 different sides. So I'm going to use 2 of my solids, and I'm going to use 2 of my prints. Okay, so I'm going to organize them. I kind of like them in a checkerboard. You don't have to do them a checkerboard. You can organize them any way you want. Okay, so there's one side. Okay, and then I would do the other side. Okay, I'm going to do it the exact same way. Okay, so now I've got both sides. I've got the top and the bottom, or vice versa, however you want. So this is a pattern I'm going to go with. If you wanted to put, the same on one side and the same on the other side, that's fine. If you wanted to put all four of the same fabrics on the top and all four of the same fabrics on the bottom, that's fine too. So however you want to do it is up to you. Now at this point, we're going to need to pin pairs of these together. Okay, so I'm going to flip one side over like that. I'm going to flip another side over like that. Okay, over like that, and over like that. Okay, they need to be lined up, of course. So when we come back, I'll show you how I pinned these, and then you'll be ready to sew. So here I have my 4 pairs together. I had flipped over, the side and the side, and now I've pinned them. Okay, so you'll make sure you line them up really well to pin them. When I, flipped them over just a minute ago, they weren't really well lined up. So I'm going to sew the edges that you see pinned here. I'm going to use a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Okay, that is the outside edge of your presser foot to sew these up. So I'm just sewing one side of each where I have it pinned. Okay, so what I'm going to do next is sew this edge down that I have pinned. Okay, I'm going to put my fabric right under the presser foot, put it back down. I'm lined up to the outside edge of the presser foot, which is a 1/4 seam allowance. Now to start, I'm going to make a few stitches, and then I'm going to do a reverse stitch. Okay, I'm going to go and take my pins out as I go, and continue down that line of stitching. And reverse my stitch to lock that, and then cut off. Okay, so now I've got my stitch down that one side. You'll repeat for the other 3, and then you'll have pairs that come together like that. Okay, so after I sewed them together, I did press the seams open. You really should do that after every time you sew seams together. Okay, it gives them a nice crisp look on the outside, makes things look professionally done. I flipped them over and I'm just lining them up, as you can see. So I've got my checkerboard pattern on the one square, which is the bottom of the pincushion, and checkerboard pattern on the other side. I did make sure that my designs were right side up. If you don't have an obvious design, it doesn't matter, but if you had something like monkeys, you might not want them to be upside down. Just depends. Of course, it wouldn't be upside down in some ways you look at it. So I've got my 2 sections here. So this time I'm going to flip this one over like that. I will pin and sew that side. I'm going to do the same thing with the other side. Flip that over. I will pin them right here and sew them again using a 1/4 seam allowance, which is the outside edge of your presser foot. Okay, after I stitch those together, I will press them as well. Okay, so I sewed both my squares together and I pressed them. I will say, one thing I forgot to say previously, is when you do pin these together, the best thing to do is to line up the seams. Okay, so you're going to match those before you pin them together. Once you get that portion pinned, you'll want to pin down the other 2 sides before you sew it. That enables you to get, a pretty even right there in the center. This one actually looks better. Okay, so once you have those 2 sewn together like that, okay, you're ready to put the 2 together. Now you'll see that there are some little, you might have some little overhang here. This is kind of a test in using correct seam allowance, using making sure things are straight, making sure things are straight when you're cutting. But occasionally these kind of things happen. The fabric might stretch a little, so forth. Okay, so you just have to be careful of that. You can trim it, or you can just go ahead and line it up, and I'll show you what I mean by that in a moment. Okay, so I've got my 2 complete squares, my bottom and my top. I am simply now going to place one on top of the other, and making sure that my right sides are together. Okay, so I've got my bottom here, or my top, doesn't really matter which. I'm going to take my other one and put it right on top. And again, what I'm going to do is make sure that my seams are matching right there. Go ahead and put a pin in that. And that's what I'm going to do all the way around. Make sure your seams are matching. So this is kind of like matching notches when you're sewing clothing. So you'll be learning what that is as well. Okay, so I'm pinning it there. So I'm pinning it at each seam. Okay, I'm going to do that first. I'm a little off, so I'm going to have to fix that. So as you can see, yeah, I am a little off somehow. Something went wrong somewhere. I stretched it or something. But you want to try to get that as close as possible. Okay, at this point, I mean, it's pretty close on this side. I might trim a little bit of that off first. I do want to use maybe a straight edge. I want to make sure that I'm cutting the straight edge. I will pin the rest of this before I sew as well. Okay, so I did do a little bit of trimming, but I went ahead and pinned the rest. I just added a few pins. You don't really need a ton of pins for these projects. What I also did is on one of my sides, I marked about a 2.5 inch space with a pin. This is the side or the little area you're going to leave open, because after you sew this, you have to have a way to turn it inside out or right side out. So you do need a little opening here. Okay, when I sew this, I want to be sure and do a back stitch right here. I'm going to sew all the way around from here to here. When I get to this mark here, I'm going to back stitch here. If you don't back stitch at these 2 points, when you turn this right side out and then start to stuff it, your stitching most likely will start to come undone a little bit, and then everything is kind of messed up. You're going to have to go back, flip it inside out again, and secure that. So make sure that you back stitch at the 2 marks that you make. Make sure your 2 marks are not close to the corners. It doesn't look right when you flip it and then eventually be hand sewing that closed. Okay, so it should be kind of in the center of that seam. Okay, you're going to sew with a 1/4 seam allowance all the way around. And then I will show you how to clip your corners, turn this right side out, and then we'll stuff it. Okay, so I have sewn all the way around. Okay, I back stitched at my little marks. So what I'm going to do now is what you call clipping the corners. I'm going to take my scissors and I'm going to cut off these corners. So I'll show you what I mean. You can see your stitching there. You don't want to cut your stitching, but you do want to clip off that corner. Okay, don't want to cut your stitching, but you want to cut pretty close to that stitching and clipping your corner. What this does is when you flip this and poke that corner out, you don't have all this extra fabric to wrestle with. So it's not going to get bunched in the corners, and your corners end up looking like little rounded shapes instead of an actual corner. Okay, so you'll do that. You're going to do that on all 4 sides. Okay, make sure you don't accidentally cut your stitching. If you cut your stitching, you're going to have to go back and sew that closed. Your seam allowance might get a little smaller. Okay, so I'm going to do that on all my sides. Ooh, that one's kind of hard to see. Okay. Once I have that all done, I am then going to go ahead and find my opening, and I'm going to turn this right side out. Okay, so I did flip this inside out, or excuse me, right side out. It looks good, but it still needs to be pressed. So what you're going to do is you're going to take this to the iron. So you kind of want to tuck those in. So when you press it, those seam allowances are getting pressed right along with it. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and take this to the ironing board, press it. These little seam allowances are tucked in, and then we will stuff it. Okay, so I have stuffed my little pincushion here. My opening is still open there. You'll notice I didn't stuff it too full to where it's like overly puffy, because one thing we are going to be doing is sewing a button right to the center of this. It's going to tuft it in like that. So if you have an overabundance of stuffing in this, that is going to be a problem. Okay, so next we're going to go ahead and stitch up this hole. There are a couple of ways you can do this. You can use a whip stitch, which is, well, this one isn't the best one I've seen, which is this little stitch here. That is perfectly fine. You want to use, thread that matches the best you can with what you have. I don't know why this person chose that color thread. There is also another stitch called the ladder stitch. I will do a separate video on how to do the ladder stitch. Pretty much it's a nice stitch because it is pretty invisible after you do it. Okay, so whichever method you want to choose, you're going to go ahead and sew up this hole so it's closed. Alright, so I did stuff my pincushion and I did close it up. I used a ladder stitch on this so it's not very visible. So the next part I'm going to need to do is sew my button to the center of this. So I chose this red button here for mine. Basically you're going to center it over, and it's basically sewing on a button just as you would any other button, except you're going to be going through some thickness here of the cushy pillow here. So I'm going to go ahead and start it from what I consider to be my bottom. Okay. All right. Thread my button through. Okay. And you're going to go through just like you normally would with any button sewing on project, except you're going to be going through the back side. Through a bunch of cushiness. Okay, so it does get a little challenging. Okay, so I have it on there, so now I just have to sew the rest of it on there. So you're going to want to kind of pinch that with your thumb. It makes it less to have to go through. And then of course just sew it on as usual. It's always hard to find where to come through. Should be somewhere in this vicinity. Where's my needle? Okay. So a little challenging here, obviously, not gonna lie. If you come up about where you came up the first time, and clearly I've loosened all my threads there. I'm going to pull them tight this time though. Okay, it's a little challenging. Okay, pull my threads tight. Alright, so you're going to kind of, like I said, keep your thumb and kind of squish it down, pinch it down as you go through to the back side again. So this will make it easier the more passes you make. And what that's doing also as you squish it, pinch it down, is it's giving that dimension to your pincushion there. Okay, so when you do pull it through the other side, you're going to kind of make sure you tug it a little bit, keep pinching it. You're going to want to go through your button 4 times, just like we always do, to make sure it's really on. Okay, so again, the challenge is finding that buttonhole. My challenge is finding it through the eye of the camera. Okay, so I'm just going to continue on with this and come back and show you the finished result. Okay, I've gone through that 4 times, and you'll kind of see the dimension there. It's kind of pulled in right there. It's pulled in on the back side. Now you'll notice my back side doesn't look that great. I'm kind of all over the place with my stitching there. But you're going to make your regular knot wherever you came up. Okay, which happened to be right there. Okay, so when you're knotting this, make sure that you knot it twice. Okay, so there's 1 time. And I'm going to go through it a 2nd time. Okay. clip that off, and then I'm going to have my finished pincushion. Okay, so there is the finished product. Stick your pins in, and now you've got a brand new pincushion.